Hey guys, Alan Bishop back with the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, your source for all things practical distilling, home distilling, hobby distilling, as well as potentially professional distilling. Kind of a special, more personal distilling philosophy video for you here this evening. And I'd not thought about putting one of these on the channel, honestly. And if you've read the book that I wrote now, I think it was 2017, the Alchemist Cabinet Philosophy Volume 1, which is available at thealchemistcabinet.com / the Warehouse 1. You probably picked up on the fact that for me, distilling is a lot more spiritual than it is a base commodity. So recently, some friends asked me to delve into that in a video, and I've been real hesitant to do it. As a matter of fact, I've been working on the follow-up to the Alchemist Cabinet Philosophy Volume 1, and I had pulled a lot of that stuff back because I think that some people look at that and, they look at it and maybe they don't understand what I'm saying. Maybe they don't see distilling that way, and that's fine. But I will tell you that after my brother Mike Stallings, Saint Sparrow as we now call him, patron saint of heathen distillers, after he passed this past week, I told my new still hand at Spirits of French Lick, Justin Whaley, I said, I pulled all that stuff out of this new book, and I said, I got to go back, I got to put it in. I just have to. It's part of who I am. It's part of what I do. So there's going to be those of you who watch this and go, well, everything there in that video is bullshit. And that's okay. You don't have to believe in any of the things that I do. You don't have to have any ideas similar to what I do to be a good distiller. You don't have to play into any of the superstitions that I play into to be a good distiller. They're a part of what makes my practice, okay? And for me, distilling is very much a practice. It's a trade and also a magical practice. Automatically, I feel many of you tuning out right now, and that's okay. You don't have to stick around for this version of my philosophy. But so I mentioned the Stallings video, as well as a video after that, that there's a time and a place for distillations. There's I've talked about moon phases in the past with distillation. I've talked about various old school superstitions with naming stills and all that kind of stuff, right? And how does that play into distillation? Now listen, again, you don't have to follow any of this. You don't have to believe any of it. You don't have to have any idea about any of it, and it's okay. You can still be a great distiller. There's certainly plenty of scientific distillers out there. My formula that I gave in that original book in 2017 was that distilling is 60% hard science. That's all the things that you can't argue with, okay? They're just rules. That's just the way it is. There's no way around it. It's just the way it is, all right? You can do it upside down, you can do it backwards, as long as you stick to the science. Even if you don't understand the science, you'll come out with a very similar result. It's 30% dark arts and 10% intuition. The 10% intuition is the most important part of it. If you don't have that 10% intuition, you're just asking to blow yourself up in your backyard. Truthfully, as my grandfather and my father gave me as a rule, don't blow your ass up in the backyard when I was 15 years old. That 30% dark arts is what makes you, first of all. Second of all, if you're in the commercial distilling industry, it's your story. It's the background. Listen, the spirits can be as good as they could possibly be, but if you don't have a story to back it up, a way to get people to pick up the bottle and show interest, right? No one cares. And for me, it's always been about a local place or local people, or a good ghost story or a good scandalous historical story. That is part of what I consider my dark arts. The other part of it is this understanding of what alchemy was, this idea that alchemy was somewhere in between chemistry or science, as well as spirituality, right? That even just like today, as much as we know about science, as much as we know about the world, as much as we've tried to quantify the world, there's always that little piece that we don't quite understand, right? That little spark, that little piece of light, or even that little piece of darkness that we can't explain in our equations. And maybe one day we'll get there. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, it's an old school quote, but magic is just science that hasn't been explained yet. But those unexplained bits are what interest me. And I'll give you a great example of that. So, magic isn't necessarily what people make it out to be. It's not Harry Potter. It's not a lot of things. So magic to me would be here's a funny word. Necromancy. All right, the idea of bringing the dead back to life. So for me, it's Spirits of French Lick. What necromancy is this idea that I can bring back characters and figures from history. Now, I can put their name and their story on a bottle. All right, characters that you, in whatever state, wherever you live, maybe you even live here in Washington County, Indiana, or Orange County, Indiana, characters that you've never heard of, stories that you've never heard, because these people got left out of the history books, either because they were scandalous, or maybe they were part of the wrong political party, or maybe they got on the wrong side of the person writing the history book, or whatever the reason is, right? And I could write 10 pages about that character as a historian. As a true historian, I could research that character. I could write 10, 15 pages about that character. Maybe even get it published in a book. Maybe 10 of you would read all of those pages and really have an understanding of that story. But if I give you a blurb on the back of a bottle and I expand upon that blurb via podcast or tastings, etc., and I give you the whole story, or even if you haven't heard the whole story, I give you the blurb on the back of the bottle, and let's say our bottle ends up, a bottle of Matty Gladden, for example. Matty Gladden High Rye Bourbon from Spirits of French Lick ends up in New Orleans, Louisiana. All of a sudden, there's a whole group of people who never heard that story in the past, never had any idea about this woman who worked for Lee Sinclair that ran away with a business partner of Lee Sinclair, started 2 brothels, one in Chattanooga, one in Nashville, became a great lover of P.T. Barnum. P.T. Barnum gave her a retirement fund to go back home to Salem, Indiana, because her son was born with Bright's disease, a degenerative disorder. She came back to Salem, Indiana. She started a brothel on Main Street in Salem, Indiana, built a beautiful Queen Anne Victorian-style house. She dealt with Chicago businessmen heading on their way to Nashville and back, etc. You guys never heard that story, but now you have. I've breathed life back into that person. To me, that is true spiritual alchemy, right? I've given somebody their dues that didn't otherwise get their dues. And so that's one part of what I mean when I use the word alchemy, or what I mean when I talk about spiritualism when it comes to the spirits in the bottle. At Spirits of French Lick, we say it's not just the spirits of the place, or it's not just the spirits in the bottle, it's also the spirits of the place, right? All those stories that you've never heard, and that's a big part of it. But one thing that I learned from Mike Stallings, and I was on this track already, but Mike Stallings very much helped me understand this. Now, bear in mind that I am a commercial distiller. Even if I'm on the craft level, on the legal side of things, I am a commercial distiller. I have to make money. It's what I do, right? If I don't feel like going in on Monday and making Lee Sinclair, too bad, suck it up, get over it, go make the same mash bill, run the same whiskey for the 500th time, and make it as best as you can, right? Somebody told me very early on in life that you go out there and you do the best you can and be as productive as you can and contribute what you can to society, and you come home with a paycheck and you be happy about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But Stallings was never a commercial distiller, right? He was a moonshiner, and he was a moonshiner in the truest sense of the form, not a my great-great-great-grandfather gave me a recipe, not in the this has been handed down through the generations, but in a understanding why and how you might make a spirit illicitly to A, make money, but B, for a spiritual reason or a spiritual cause. So one of the things that he helped me understand, which is something that I wrote about even before I met him in that book, that Alchemist Cabinet Philosophy book. I very early on in my career, and very early on even before I got in the legal industry, I realized that certain processes of nature and certain processes of superstition seemed to affect the spirits that I was working on. So one of the things I talk about is barometric pressure. That slows the still down. It's like putting the braking system on. Everything else being the same throughout the distillation, you have a storm front come through that slows everything down. The idea that stills all have their own character, right? Pot stills in particular, not column stills, not continuous stills, but pot stills. If you have 5 pot stills in one building making the same mash, all the specs being the same, and them all being run by the same distiller, all 5 pot stills will give you a slightly different result. You do not create consistency over time from a pot still. You manage it over time by blending your various pot still distillations together, right? Another example would be something like old school Scottish and Irish superstition. So back in the day, you didn't run a still that didn't have a name. Now, you might run it once or twice to figure out what its characteristics were, and then you named it appropriately. So For us, it's Spirits of French Lake. This Spirits of French Lake is just an example. I've done this at Copper and Kings. I've done this on home level in the past as well. But let's say our 1,200 gallon stripping still at Spirits of French Lake. Stainless steel body, copper head, right? And all she does is strip alcohol off. And what's her name? Well, I always name them after women. They're always named after goddesses of antiquity and or characters from the Bible. One way or the other. I name them after women because a pot still is curvy. It's giving birth to a spirit. It's giving birth to a feeling, an idea, etc. Something is being born into the world, right? But we always name them after whatever their characteristics are. And the reason that she's been named Lilith after the first wife of Adam, who would not obey Adam, is because after running her a couple times and doing tours, I very quickly realized that if something was going to go wrong in the distillery in the middle of a tour, it was going to be something with that still. Either a gasket would leak, or the agitator would leak, or an alarm would go off, or something. There was always some sort of characteristic that would stick out and come to me. And those things become superstitions to some degree too, things that you pay attention to, right? Those superstitions are not always unhealthy. They are not, truthfully. Sometimes superstitions remind you to pay attention to what you are doing. And I'll give you another example of that. So one of the old Irish American things with moonshining is you would maybe moonshine once a year in the fall, and you would come to whatever barn your Italian, not Irish, your Italian relatives would have a barn, and maybe you'd be distilling in that barn, and you'd all get together as a family, and you'd make your particular spirit or your liqueur for the year, and when you were done, there would be a towel hanging on the door. And as you walked out of the building, you would take your hands without any soap or without any water, and you wipe your hands on the towel, and that was called the washing of the hands. And the idea behind that was that it was to remind you, it was a superstition, it'd be bad luck not to do this, but it was to remind you that you don't talk about this to anyone outside the family. You don't talk about this again until you're in this building again next year doing the same thing, right? So back to the naming the stills. So we have a 350 gallon copper pot still that's, honestly, it's a Swiss Army knife of distillation. If you can imagine a spirit in the world, we can replicate it on that particular still. And as such, we have named that still Sophia, the Gnostic goddess of wisdom, the all-knowing, all-seeing light. The one above all but below the one, as it were, okay? When it comes to our 650 gallon copper hybrid still with a 4-plate column, that her name is Anana, that's our main whiskey still. We don't actually run the column actively. We bought it for the taller column that's on it to get some passive reflux from the environment in the wintertime. So she makes almost all of our whiskeys and our brandies. She's literally named after Inanna, the Babylonian goddess of wheat and fertility. When it comes to times of the year to distill, one of the things that affects pot still distillation that I'll throw out there even on a commercial basis, and I've been tracking this for years and years and years since I was at Copper and Kings, we keep track of moon phases. Moon phases very much so affect batch distillation. So a lot of people think that's crazy, but think about it like this. The moon affects every standing body of liquid on the face of the planet, right? It affects the oceans. It affects rivers and lakes. It affects humans. If you talk to people in law enforcement or in the ambulance service, they will tell you that the full moon certainly has a gravitational effect or some psychological effect on people, right? That they get more calls during a full moon. When you think about a pot still, you have a standing body of liquid. It is going to be affected by the same things that any other standing body of liquid on the face of the planet is affected by. And what alchemists were really doing is recreating the processes of evaporation and condensation, as well as all the various different amplifiers of those things, right, throughout the earth. So it stands to reason, to me at least, and I can point this out, I could eventually graph out what I have to show that during a full moon, a pot still, all other things being equal, might run a little bit faster in a full moon than it will in a new moon. Barometric pressure, again, here's another fun one. Some of these are scientific facts, as opposed to spiritual, but I think that the two, for me, they combine back and forth. If you were to go into the barrel room, the barrel chai, barrel cellar, or the barrel warehouse right before a storm front comes through. So a lot of people ask on tours, hey, do you roll barrels around? No, you don't need to. I know they do that for show at some places. They used to do it at Maker's Mark. There was one warehouse, you'd walk out of the tour and you see a warehouse, people were moving barrels around. Those barrels rolled awful easy for being full 550-pound barrels. But the truth of the matter is, and you don't have to play music to them. every time the barometric pressure changes, if you guys are familiar, if you're from a rural area, you understand that in the springtime, the storm fronts come through, a pond will flip over from the bottom to the top. The same thing happens in the warehouse every time the barometric pressure changes. Now, as far as going back to times of the year to distill, so traditionally distilling has been agriculturally centered. It's also been centered on the fall time, the harvest, and the winter time, the processing, right? So one of the things that I truly do believe about spirits is that spirits are a tool, all right, as many things are, that God, whatever version of God you would like to believe in, has given to man to maybe lubricate life, maybe lubricate social interactions, maybe lubricate the dark months of the winter time when you maybe need a little more oomph behind your ideas and your theology, your theosophy, etc., right? A little bit more to make you believe in something beyond yourself, or to let you step through a door and step out of yourself potentially and make yourself vulnerable in a way in which God can more easily communicate with you. Now, can that be abused with alcohol? Absolutely. It absolutely can be. But I do believe that alcohol is a tool. And one of the things that Mike Stallings taught me is that distilling at home is very much about intention. What do you intend for the spirits that you're going to put in front of people? What would you like people to feel about your spirits? How can you evoke that feeling from the spirits that you were creating? Very much so, just like the old school alchemists that were also into sparygic medicine, alcohol becomes a medicine. Can you use this medicine to heal someone's spirit or make them realize something in their spirit? They may be too hard-headed and sober life to realize. These are those spiritual aspects. This is the gift that is given to us of distillation. Not only fermentation, but the next step, distillation, and amplification of the fermentation that was given to us, semi in the background, sorry, that was given to us as the fire of the gods from Prometheus. This is the next step of that. A much larger, much more intense step. And yes, it can and will bite you if you take it too far. When it comes down to even simple things like filtration, sometimes you will see me, and I haven't done it on the channel yet, but I will, or you'll see me in my books. I'll talk about filtering through amethyst or quartz crystals, etc. Or fermenting with quartz crystals, or even throwing a quartz crystal into a distillation. Again, there's no scientific basis for this. You guys can discard this as complete bullshit if you want to, and that's completely fine. For me, these are things that make me pay closer attention to my art. They make me pay closer attention to the people that I might be serving spirits to and what they may be going through and whether or not they're ready to handle the door that's going to be open for them when they drink these spirits. Crystals, for me, because I am into that line of thinking, very much become an amplifier of whatever my will is when I am performing my art. All right. Sometimes you'll see me filter through them. Sometimes you'll see them go into the still. You'll see them used variously different places. And I'm not going to try to hide that anymore. The death of my friend Mike Stallings has revealed to me that I shouldn't try to hide them. Again, you don't have to regard them as anything. You can ignore all of my meta bullshit and just pay attention to the science. And that's okay too. But I wanted to do a video about this because, again, I've been asked about it multiple times. And I thought I would throw it out there. And listen, just if you have negative thoughts, don't bother leaving them here because I'm not going to respond to you. It's not worthwhile. If you have positive thoughts, please feel free to leave them here. That'd be fantastic. Either way, I am here from a distiller's perspective to give you information you may not have, and sometimes you're not going to agree with that information, and this may be one of those cases where you don't agree with it, and that's perfectly fine. There's a deeper level to this. It goes back to where distilling came from. The cults that it originated in, how it ended up in Europe via the Cathars and the Rosicrucians, and in Ireland via the monks, and then from the monks over to the heathens, the people who lived in the heath, the Gauls, as they would call them, those other people, those Norse people that were making stone beer for various forms of not only inebriation but also spirituality. So we can get into all that at some later time, but that's what I got for tonight. As always, if you guys have questions, reach out to me, bishopshomegrown@gmail.com, in the YouTube comments below. Or you can always go to thealchemistcabinet.com to follow everything else I do, whether it be our paranormal podcast, If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, or go to the store at The Alchemist Cabinet /The Warehouse 1 and buy our autographed books, DVD, shirts, mugs, etc. It feels like a Ghostbusters commercial, really, just to be honest with you. Anyways, as always, I love you guys. Later.